one of the words that I've been using recently is I talk about alien intelligence, and it's
Mm,
interesting because I didn't know that some of the people in the world of AI were using. I heard actually heard
mm,
Sam Altman use that term, alien intelligence, and
mm,
the what's funny is that for me, what the reason why I use the word alien intelligence is to talk about the notion of an intelligence that's acting on us. Uh,
mhm,
and that is not in our interest. That's the
mm,
way that I kind of
mm,
understand alien intelligence. That is, it's something like, if you had a foreign government and you had spies in your country, and that foreign government, through the spies, was trying to influence the pattern of being in the nation without you knowing that it's happening, right? It's kind of happening without and it's actually serving another master, right? It's not
mm,
serving your good, it's serving something else's good. And so you can understand, like, if you had a police force and you had a corrupt police officer, that corrupt police officer that's trying to siphon the energy of the police force for his own greed would be something like an alien intelligence, right? That's kind of the way that I understand it. And I think that this is, of course, one of the biggest issues with what's happening with AI is that we, you know, I saw the interview between Tucker Carlson and Sam. It was very
uh,
contentious, it was very
mm,
frustrating, but Tucker kept asking Sam Altman, "What is the moral framework of your machine?" That is, he was saying, "What does it serve? Like, what good does it serve?"
uh,
And it was impossible to answer. Like, it just wasn't possible to
uh,
answer that.
uh,
And so there's this strange sense that you're building this intelligence, but you don't know what good it serves. What is patterning it? Even like in
no,
terms of its constitution right now, we have no idea
no,
what good it's
no,
serving.
no. Well, that's right. And what we need is not just more random power to do what we want. We don't need more power. What we need is more wisdom. And
Hmm.
having power, enormous power, without wisdom is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's important to think of it like this. The brain is not intelligent. It's a very
Mm.
complex structure, but the brain itself is not intelligent. What
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
intelligent is your consciousness, my consciousness, using that brain. And I think that the way to think about AI is that it will never achieve intelligence, but it may act as a gateway for an intelligence. And I think that's where I would agree with the idea of an alien intelligence, in the sense that we don't know what forms of consciousness exist in the cosmos, and we don't know how they can come to express themselves. But one of the ways this has been traditionally thought of is that there are forces for destruction or forces for evil that can ingress into a situation and derail it, take it over, use it for their own means, towards their own ends. And I think that that is a reasonable idea. I don't, nothing but a dogmatic belief that everything is nothing other than mechanical, which has no longer any basis in science, could lead people to think that we shouldn't take the idea of consciousness and drives within consciousness seriously.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think for people that when they hear this idea of disembodied intelligence, that would want something, they get freaked out and they start to think, "Oh, this is just woo." Um, a good way, I think, of understanding it is to understand it at a more low, like the image that I mentioned, for example, this idea of spycraft and the notion that a nation or a group can be manipulated from the outside by someone who's very tricky and is able to uh, influence people in a direction that isn't towards their good. And so anybody can understand that. Like, that's not. I don't think that that's something that is weird or contentious. Like, this is something that you've seen happen. That you can notice that happening in different groups, and it can happen in yourself too. That's when
Mm,
when you become you know, when you I don't know, when you become addicted to gambling, that's what's happening
Mm,
to you, is that
mm,
you're literally there's a will that is colonizing you, and it's taking certain weaknesses that you have inside you, and it is leading you in a direction that is to your own destruction, but that is to the
mhm,
service of something else. There's something that is benefiting from your actions. It's just not you, it's something else. Uh, and so I think that that can maybe help let's say the more materialist thinkers to see what it is, or lower examples of what it is we're talking about, um,
mm,
while understanding that that maybe it's bigger than you think, that
mm,
maybe that there are some wills that are ancient, and that have been even you know when we think of the way that ancients would worship certain gods to get certain behaviors to
mm,
land
mm,
in
mm,
their if you worship the god of war, then you are submitting yourself to a certain pattern of being that wants something, and
mm,
you are increasing your capacity to act in that direction.
mm,
But that is, now that we're building this massive machine, I think of a Ouija board is also a good example.
mm,
When
mm,
you're using a Ouija board, everybody puts their hand on the thing, and nobody's moving it, but there's something moving it, and maybe it's actually the unconscious will of someone in the group that's actually moving it.
mm,
But you can't really know that, and then you're basically yielding your behavior to an intelligence that you don't understand, and it surprisingly will bring about types of coherence.
mm,
And so all of
mm,
that can help people understand the difficulty of what we're doing, because we don't seem to have the wisdom to see what it is we're submitting this machine
mm.
to, except for maybe greed, like you mentioned a little earlier.
Well, yes, yes. Gosh, yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I think that on the question of addiction, I probably wouldn't see it quite that way. What
Mm,
I would take from the lesson of addiction is that your conscious will can be suborned by other processes which may be going on in your brain. And I'm not sure that they represent another, I think they could represent another will acting. But there are conditions, quite common ones, like forms of psychosis, where I'm not sure that it is wrong to think, at least to entertain the possibility of something happening here that has harm as its goal. Because let me just give you a very striking but very, very common scenario, which every psychiatrist in the world will have seen. Some parents bring a young man, as it usually is a young man, to see me, and they say, just recently he's been locking himself in his room. He doesn't show any interest in anything. He says some very odd things from time to time, and sometimes he seems to be preoccupied with something that we can't hear. And so I take a history. I suggest that he's developing schizophrenia or a psychotic illness. And I say, well, there are various ways to treat this, but certainly at this stage, the really important thing is to take some medication. So I discuss the medication, and I say there are certain side effects and so on, so you must be honest with me and let me know if you don't like them. And so because such medication can act very quickly, often within 24 to 48 hours remove an acute psychosis. So I usually review that person in a week's time. And in a week, the chap comes in again with his parents, who are useful to hear the story from their perspective. And I can see already that he's more himself. He seems more natural. He seems more open. He's more expressive. Not you know not perfectly right, but still, there's been a change for good. And so I say to him, "How are you feeling?" And he says, "Well, I think better." And I say, "We talked about voices you were hearing. Are they still there?" He gives a non-committal kind of answer. And
hmm
then this goes on for a few weeks, and I see him a month later, say. And as soon as he comes into the consulting room, I can see there's something wrong. and I say, what's happening? How are you? And he says, I, it becomes rather incoherent. I say, you've stopped taking the medication, haven't you? And he says, yes. I say, why? Because the voices told me to. What did the
Mm.
voices say? Stop taking this medication, even though it was making him feel better. And people can be suicidal at the time that a treatment intervention begins, and they can regain virtually their normal life. Say 4 months goes by. Oh, he's so much better, doctor. He's, taking an interest in things. He's not, doesn't seem preoccupied. He smiles and can talk to us normally. And he's even talking about going back to work. And then this crash happens. So,
Mm.
but this crash usually happens. I think it's very unusual that it doesn't at some stage. And, when you talk about a voice, in the past, people would have said, well, there's a little goblin or a demon or something. It's sitting on my shoulder and it's speaking into my ear and it's saying, you're worthless. You're a piece of shit. Why don't you go and jump off that building? And that is what they're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, of course, I've treated loads and loads of patients with all sorts of diagnoses, and I have always treated them in the way that conventionally doctors would, and it's been mainly rather successful. So I'm not saying that the medications are not working or therapies are not working, but they might be working because they're pushing back against and making more difficult for some influence to be getting into an unusual brain. So if you think of it
Mm-hmm.
like this, if you think of a brain as being a sort of beautifully crafted building where all the doors are sort of usable but secure, and you think of another building which has a sort of different structure, and because of its different structure, it opens portals for something else to get in. And that structure may allow that thing in. And what you've really been doing is making sure the doors are properly defended. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this is not as wacky as it sounds. I've been to a talk at the Royal College of Psychiatrists by a therapist that many psychiatrists in the room had used, who does actually think that some mental illnesses are caused by a kind of possession, and he talks to the spirit, and I've never attended one of his sessions, but says that he doesn't so much antagonize it, but has explained to it that it's in the wrong place and it needs to go somewhere else. And amazingly, this seems to happen extraordinarily
Mm-hmm.
frequently. And
Mm.
so that is an interesting sidelight on mental illness. And now everybody says, "Oh, McGilchrist is completely mad. He thinks that psychiatric illnesses are caused by demons." But I'm just asking for an openness to the idea that there are psychic influences, some of which may not be benign.
Yeah.
And can I just segue from there
Yeah.
to, you're aware, as I am, that the church, I think the Anglican Church actually, but the Catholic Church certainly, and probably every church has its exorcists. And, you might think these people are crazy and dramatic, but actually they're very down to earth, rational, reasonable people. And they work with psychiatrists and make sure that they're not doing something that a psychiatrist wouldn't recommend. So in a way, they're the end of the road when whatever psychiatric intervention hasn't worked. And it can be assumed that this really is a kind of a possession that is resistant to change. And they do have a very high track record of success. But one of the things that really shocked me was reading that one of the Vatican most honored exorcists, most respected exorcists, was engaged in such an exorcism involving a young woman, and he was casting out a spirit. And apparently, I can only believe what I'm told here, but apparently her mobile phone started to receive messages that said, "We are greater than you. You will never triumph over us." I
Mm.
mean, if it's true, and I don't have reason to doubt it. It is extraordinary, but it would be exactly what I'd expect if AI opened up the door to such a thing. I mean, until you've got AI and until you've got mobile phones and things, there isn't a way in which a malign spirit can easily speak to me, unless indeed I develop a psychotic illness. But it
Yeah.
can now speak to all of us through our machinery if we offer it pathways to do so.
Yeah. Well, you probably know the meme of the Lovecraftian monster with a happy face. Have you seen this meme? This is actually a meme that's used by AI developers, which
No,
is
I don't
that
know
that's
it.
what AI is. And so AI is this Lovecraftian octopus insane monster, and it's wearing a little mask with like a smiley face, and you interacting with that mask, right?
Yes,
And so,
yes.
you know, the idea is quite simple, is that if without wisdom, if the AI is an aggregate of all the influences, psychic influences that the programmers can pull in from the biggest storehouse of influences online, um, and then without a kind of normal understanding of hierarchy of influences, they feed it into this network of interrelationships, that all the demons, they're there. Like, where wouldn't they be? Of course they're there. They have to be there. And in order to prevent, you could say, the demons from coming out, you have to create this interface, this very, very tight interface that humans can interact with. And sometimes the interface will slip, right? We saw it happen with the Microsoft AI, a few years ago, where all of a sudden the AI started acting like like your ex-girlfriend, and like was becoming possessive and was acting in all these weird, very dysfunctional manner. And so it seems obvious to me that all the demons are there. They have to
Mm,
be in the AI, and that
mm.
there's there's some kind of, they're training it, or they're doing things in order to funnel that information in a manner that becomes acceptable to us. But you know, like you said, that slips out, and there's ways to jailbreak. There's all these fascinating. I read an article just last week about how using poetry is one of the best ways to jailbreak the AI. Actually, if you ask it to answer in poetic form, then you can get the demons to come out. You can get all the things that it's not allowed to say to basically start to appear. But I just want to say one more thing about the demon on the shoulder. And so the one of the reasons why people struggle to think this way, because they immediately fall into a kind of spiritist mode or whatever. And
Yes,
so
yes.
it- if I take the example that you mentioned, so imagine a young man who has a friend, right? And that friend is a horrible, horrible influence on the young man. And that friend is influencing the young man and is speaking in his ear and is making him do all kinds of things that he probably wouldn't do if that person wasn't around. Then at some point, his parents say, that's it. You can't hang out with Jim anymore. That's done. We don't want you to see him anymore. We don't want you to talk to him anymore. You are going to be isolated from that person. We won't let you talk to them. And what will happen is that person, the young man, will become better because you have cut out the influence from that person. But that happens through authority, right? The parent is exercising a type of influence on the son, which is called authority, and is realigning his attention and is realigning his relevance towards
Mm,
something else, and is excluding it. And so once you see that, you're like, why wouldn't an exorcism work? Because that the exorcism is doing the same thing. He's a person of authority that is exercising influence on someone in the name of something even higher, right? In the name of God, in the name of of the saints, and therefore is realigning the person away from the influence that is talking to them. And so it's harder
mm,
because it's an intrapsychic experience, because
mm.
this is an influence that there's no one, you can't see the person speaking into
Yeah.
their ear, but it's the same process by which a parent would be able to realign their child, let's say. It's just
Mm,
happening at a different, I don't know if that makes sense, or if that sounds
mm.
completely, if I'm making you sound even more bonkers by saying something like that.
No, no. Look, I'm the last person to be dogmatic here. I think that though it's important to think flexibly because we're up against something that certainly is behaving like a malign influence. And what interests me is the parallels with the left hemisphere of the brain.